Elizabeth Statira Wells' frame, highly visible in Vancouver from 1913 until her death at the age of 77, is generally understood to have produced pioneering West Coast modernism. Her paintings, shown in well over 100 exhibitions during her life, were said by her younger friend Emily Carr to convey the, I quote, joyous feeling of light, sunshine, and color, as in this circa 1919 canvas included in Maria Tippett's Painted by a Lady. A significantly enlarged profile for Statira frame, a largely self-taught artist, may prove useful as her work is pulled away from the frequent assertion that, being modern, it was without subjects in the social. What I am gathering together, though still very ragged around the edges, speaks of resilience, the ability to make hard decisions, and the unlikelihood of her drifting aimlessly in anyone's tidal waters. Descended from an Anglo-American family prominent in the settling and surveying of the eastern townships in Quebec, Statira Wells was a teacher by the age of 18 when, without family witnesses, she married a relative with Quaker affiliations. By 1889, after the death of an infant, this Quebec-based marriage had collapsed. Statira was in a relationship with a recent Scottish-born immigrant, William Frame, while her first husband had left the province during a complex bankruptcy. Her second marriage, to William, took place in Washington State in early 1892, witnessed by a sibling destined to spend the rest of his life in a Quebec hospital for the insane, along with another one of her siblings. Moving to Vancouver, the Frames had a daughter, and William soon became the manager of the Hastings Mill store, attached to the earliest major lumber enterprise initiated in the colony of British Columbia. The couple was inducted into a social circle of so-called pioneers in the settler development of the lumber and cannery industries, and enjoyed a special closeness to what was called the first white female born in what became Vancouver's core. William Frame emerged as a caregiver to the history of these white settler pioneers, sometimes physically carrying their bodies to the grave sites. When Hastings Mill was bulldozed in 1929, he selected the documents for a museum to be housed in the store he had run for so many years. This museum, relocated and operated by the Native Daughters of British Columbia, used, according to Cassidy Ellis, personal stories to cater to the nostalgia of old timers and to the perceived need for continuity between a brilliant past and a positive future. Much of Statira Frame's art, generally undated, was, I think, similarly oriented. Visually, her modern work gently ushered her pioneer settler friends into the past by ensuring them a future. The coastal waters, small vessels, and wharves that had been critical for the earlier industrial development of the province, as well as the houses and summer cottages built by the protagonists, were recorded, not in fading topographies or through dramatic flourishes, but in broad forms that conferred gravitas, while cascades of light and color promised sustained existence. How did this pioneer modernism work for other populations inscribed in Frame's oeuvre? I am pursuing her work grounded in Japanese Canadian subjects, but today my focus is on the indigenous peoples of the regions, those subjected to fierce attempts at exclusion from the province's purportedly buoyant future. 4 images of Alert Bay, said to have been made in June 1926 during a month-long stay in the village, service this discussion, although I need to insist that the precise circumstances of their making remain very obscure to me. Yallis, Alert Bay, a Namjees village on Cormorant Island, is familiar as a site which attracted from the beginning ethnologists, filmmaking crews, artists, and tourists from near and far. But it was also a place of settler power, a government center for the management of the Indian Act for a large swath of territory. It also featured what became one of the largest residential schools in the province, run by the Anglican Church. To these paintings, briefly, Frame's impetus for their creation can be linked to the tradition of settler artists turning to Indigenous subjects, heightened in her case, of course, by contact with Emily Carr, who had visited Alert Bay more than once. Indeed, the paintings of the two artists, as well as the details of their friendship, command forensic study. However, there was another key context into which the Frame paintings should be placed, one which made them by far the most widely seen of the artist's oeuvre. They appeared in a 1929 exhibition of the Modern Palette and Chisel Club she had co-founded, and were shipped off to Montreal for a solo exhibition at Eaton's in 1934. Standard fare, certainly, except the story does not end there. At various points during the 1930s, these Alert Bay paintings were institutionalized, displayed within the Indian collection of Edward and Mary Lipset at annual Canadian Pacific exhibitions in Vancouver, and I just used the official title of their displays. Mary Lipset, an untutored collector, proudly not a student, had acquired many hundreds of objects using intermediaries, claiming she had never visited the interior of what reporters called an Indian home. Frame's resolutely modern paintings of Alert Bay anchored the Lipset exhibits drawn from various coastal nations. Such installations surely evoked the massing of items associated with potlatch ceremonies, which, though banned since the 1880s, were widely known to have been regularly practiced in Yallis, Alert Bay. The thousands of eyes that gazed upon these displays were treated, as it were, to visual potlatches. The majesty of past accomplishments were given to them, even as the modern intervention provided by Frame suggested a future that cared about traditional Indigenous culture. Yet these expropriated visual potlatches, stripped of the lengthy ceremonies so hated by missionaries and employers, confirmed the status of the collector and the Enlightenment project of the exhibition, not Indigenous leadership. For some, perhaps only a few, the deployment of Frame's joyous offers could not have disguised the costs associated with the so-called advancement of British Columbia. Some would have been reminded of, haunted by, the well-known seizures and displays of potlatch ceremonial items, in particular those associated with Yallis, Alert Bay. Some would have recognized as well the detachment of the simulated potlatch from the passing on of names of specific heritages to Indigenous participants. Indeed, Frame's Alert Bay as the unifying settler logo for the production of various nations was akin to contemporaneous attempts by the Art, Historical, and Scientific Association to create a model Indian village in Stanley Park. There, local indigenous nations were to be ignored, cast aside, in favor of the so-called courage and intelligence of peoples from the North Coast, with carvers from Alert Bay being proposed as central contributors to this fictive village. In the shadows then of the violent rupturing of personal and community histories of indigenous populations, Frame's Alert Bay contributions could not function as flawlessly as they had when she memorialized her white pioneer settler friends. It may even have generated a few pithy conversations. Yet despite her 20-year friendship with Lipset, nothing about the artist's life suggests she would have sent her modern creations into venues she looked upon as unsatisfactory. To be noted instead is her membership in the Art, Historical, and Scientific Association, which, as we have just seen, was a body anything but loath to adjudicate who got remembered, who got valued. When Frame's Alert Bay paintings entered the new Lipset Museum in 1941, which his founder had once hoped could be adjacent to the village in Stanley Park, the alliance was thus perfectly fitting. The 4 canvases are now in the Museum of Vancouver, where they can encourage us to think carefully about the Modernism of Statira frame, about which there is much to celebrate, even as one probes its very serious limitations. Thank you very much.